everybody's quite excited about LNG at the moment. Apparently it's the fledgling and very dynamic component of the gas sector, accounting for about 30% of overall gas trade. We know that Africa is endowed with gas reserves, but there's just a sense that we're not doing enough to exploit that. Why?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here. It's a great opportunity. With respect to your question, I would sort of want to take it more broadly and look overall at gas in Africa. And as I presented in my paper too, Sub-Saharan Africa accounts for about 44% of the gas reserves of the whole continent of Africa.
Right.
But currently, we're producing only about 22% of the gas that's being produced in Africa. So clearly there's a big lead here. There's a lot more gas being produced by the North African countries than Sub-Saharan African countries. And going forward, I think there will be more and more gas as it's explored and discovered that we're finding in several different parts of Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. And I think part of that will get exported, potentially as LNG. Part of it might be exported between the countries within Africa through pipeline, and a part of it would obviously fuel the growth in the domestic economies.
I mean, we're told that natural gas reserves stand somewhere in the region of 14 trillion cubic meters, most of that in the Gulf of Guinea, and yet the concentration seems to be on oil, exploiting oil and not gas. What synergies are there, and why is it that authorities are not pursuing a two-pronged approach here?
I think this is a very important and an interesting question. We've got to look at this not just from the perspective of the authorities, but also how is it that, what is it that distinguishes oil from gas? And I think the key element there is transportability. So whereas if you have oil, you put it onto a barge and you can export it, and it's very, very easily transportable. It's a globally priced commodity, so you don't have to have in place any regulations or anything. So doing oil trading or exploring, finding oil is when a company finds the jackpot, because you've got an easily tradable, easily transportable global product. When you look at gas, on the other hand, you have a product that requires the building of a lot more infrastructure. Because if it's offshore, you have to build a pipeline to bring it onshore.
Yeah.
If it's onshore, you have to build a pipeline to get it to where there is a use for that gas, whether it is in power or whether it's in other uses. And building all of that infrastructure requires a lot more integration with the local economy, with the economy where the resource has been found. And it also therefore requires an enabling environment.
Right.
And that's where I think we have to develop a lot more in Sub-Saharan Africa, not just in terms of the exploration for that gas, but also development of the infrastructure and development of the regulatory policies and the enabling environment that will make it profitable for companies to come and do that.
I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as though the only company that's really directed its energies towards liquefied natural gas and just developing an expertise is Sasol. And the question is, where are the rest of the private sector players in the space? I mean, especially for the countries that don't have gas or oil as a natural endowment, they do face the heightened cost of fuel imports, electricity shortages. This would be in their benefit to start thinking about the infrastructure into gas pipelines and the like, but it just doesn't seem as though the players are comfortable and confident to come into the market.
I think there are different steps or stages at which you have to look at the question. But before I delve into that, I do want to sort of make the correction that besides Sasol, there are other players within Africa. On the LNG side, there is the Nigeria LNG, NLNG, which has been exporting LNG for quite a while. In terms of endowment with reserves, we have a situation where I think Nigeria is the 7th largest reserves of gas in the world. So clearly, the future for Nigeria, while the past and even the present is heavily tilted towards oil, the future for Nigeria, I think, has to be more and more tilted towards gas increasingly. So, so that's sort of the backdrop to this. And clearly, there is gas in many other places too. I think the critical factor that you have to look at, and obviously the conditions and the enabling environment in different countries are different, but overall, if you have a regulatory regime or an open market regime, whichever way you look at it, that allows for the appropriate return on investment, I'm sure there will be companies that will come in and explore, find, and develop the gas resource.
We've run out of time, but I want to know, with this whole debate around fracking in South Africa and the so-called environmental impact of shale gas mining, if that's the terminology, why do we insist that natural gas is the way to go, is the safer option, is the cheaper option?
Well, fracking is just to do with one type of gas, shale gas, that we're talking about. But I think it would not be appropriate to color the entire gas risk box with fracking. And even as we talk about fracking, there is obviously developments that have gone on, and one of the world's leaders in shale gas is the United States, where obviously there are strict environmental standards and so forth. And therefore, I don't believe per se fracking is wrong, but it's an issue of how you develop the expertise.
All right, thanks so much for your time, Sandeep Kohli, who's sector leader for oil, gas and chemical sectors in Sub-Saharan Africa at the IFC.